Facilitators for this evening. First of all, we have Iona Lutey. She is the Northeastern's Regional Coordinator for Citizens Climate Lobby. Myself, Ricky Bradley. I'm the Dallas, Texas Group Leader and one of the IT Directors for CCL. And we also have Danny Richter, who's our Science and Legislative Director for Citizens Climate Lobby. But first up tonight, we're going to just real quick just roll through the agenda. We're going to talk, Iona's going to tell her story of how she was able to transform herself from a scaredy cat when it comes to lobbying all the way to what I would say is a lioness of lobbying. And she's going to tell you a little bit about that transformation and how CCL's preparation helped her on that road. We'll also then we'll switch gears and we'll begin to talk a little bit about Congress, the basic structure of Congress, and obviously there's no one better to do that than our legislative director, Danny Richter. We'll talk about what it's like to be a citizen lobbyist. So what's the difference between being a citizen lobbying and being a paid professional lobbyist, and where are our advantages and our disadvantages in what we do. We'll talk about building relationships, and really that's the cornerstone of what we do at Citizens Climate Lobbying. We'll talk about some of the different things you can do to begin building or to continue a deep relationship with your member of Congress and or their staff. And then we're going to also wrap up tonight. We're going to do this for all of our lobbying webinars. We're actually going to practice some communication skills. And if anyone's been to a regional conference lately or even a national conference, this is something we're really focused on. We're focused on developing a deeper understanding of people, to listen to them, to find what shared values we may have, and then asking questions to draw out more information instead of just giving them a sort of a robotic answer or a laser talk, but understand what's the value behind what they're saying and try to share common ground with them. And we're going to demonstrate what that means and how to go about doing that at the very end of tonight's presentation. So before we get started and before we get into all that, we have a wonderful experiential story from Iona Lutey. And so Iona, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell your story.
Okay. So in 2013, that was my first CCL conference, and I had only read about CCL like 2 weeks before, and I just said to myself, this is for me. So I just hopped on a train and went down to the conference, and went straight from a wedding. I was like racing down to Washington, and I really knew very little about CCL. I got there late, but I got some information at the conference, but I was still a little overwhelmed. And then here I found myself on Tuesday, on lobbying day, actually going to walk into to legislators' offices. So I was pretty nervous. I didn't feel up to the science. I had never lobbied before. I hadn't really had time to process all the things that I'd learned at the conference. In those days, they didn't have, we didn't get all kinds of preparation like this before. So I was really pretty nervous. But then my first appointment was at a Senate office, and so I met the other CCLers outside in the hallway, and first they were just incredibly welcoming and friendly, and that kind of helped me relax and put me at ease. And so we got a really good start. And I also really liked the fact that we had a structure and roles. So I think that made me feel more comfortable before we went in, kind of knowing kind of what each of us was sort of expected to do. So that was really good. And then, so when we went in, everyone was very polite. It was quite formal, I thought, and businesslike. And it was a Senate staffer meeting, and they were talking a lot about the Senate Finance Committee, which was completely over my head. But I was impressed at how knowledgeable the other CCLers were, and really, it was pretty cool. And the meeting structure, I thought, kept it very professional. It just felt really professional and solid. So I was just super impressed. And the subsequent meetings that day were over on the House side, and they were with staffers also. And the staffers were just super nice. They were pretty relaxed and kind of easy with us, and I thought that was kind of fabulous. And so they really put us at ease. So I even started speaking up and making some points, which I thought was great. So it just felt like a very human experience. And I really liked how the CCLers worked as a team. It really worked. For some reason, we had just 15 minutes to prepare and sort ourselves out, but somehow it fell together with really great teamwork. And the focus even then on listening, I think it's even more now, but the CCL focus on listening made it feel like a conversation, so it felt pretty natural. So, so I was very impressed, and so afterwards, I have to say that after the end of the day, I was pretty much in awe of the fact that I had actually done this, gone into Congress and lobbied. It was really thrilling, and I felt really proud. It was kind of just a lovely feeling, and I also did feel confidence that this is doable, that I really could learn how to do this, and with CCL's help, just be able to be effective and helping with this cause that I cared about so much. So that is my story.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Iona. And Iona is going to come back and do some more and help demonstrate the communication skills and talk about some other things here in just a few moments. But I think it's just such a powerful story to hear, that we do have more preparation now, so you don't get thrown into the meeting sometimes, but also that you can depend on others in your meeting. You don't feel like you have to be the smartest person in the room, that there's a capable team with you. And I think that is very helpful to a lot of folks that are going for their first time to know that. So we'll come back in just a few moments, and Iona will join us again. But first of all, just to let you know where we're going. This webinar is the first in a series of 4 webinars, and really they are designed to help empower citizens who are planning to meet with their member of Congress with really the basic knowledge that you'll need to understand Congress and what it's like to lobby as a citizen. So we'll start off and we'll talk about Congress, lobbying and relationships. We'll go into lobby prep in our 201 lesson, which really is about researching the different roles that you can play in a lobby meeting and practicing. Then in our Lobby 301 webinar, we'll talk about the meeting flow and some of the important elements of the meeting flow, and we'll actually demonstrate a meeting with a member of Congress. So we'll actually go through and let you hear what that sounds like. And then on our last webinar, we'll talk about difficult situations. There's always something that can pop up during a meeting, and we'll talk about how to overcome that. And it's also some other advanced lobbying skills. But we do realize that there's a bunch of folks in this webinar who maybe aren't all that familiar with how Congress is structured. So CCL Science and Legislative Director Danny Richter will start us off now by reviewing the basics of our U.S. Congress.
All right. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Very exciting to hear that so many of you are coming to the conference for the first time. It really can be a life-changing experience, and I'm looking forward to meeting you. So we'll go ahead and get started with the very basics, and it doesn't get more basic than this. The Senate, there are 2 chambers of Congress. You have the Senate and you have the House. In the Senate, every state gets 2 senators, and because there are 50 states, that's a total of 100 senators, and senators serve 6-year terms. In the House of Representatives, there's 1 representative per district. Each state is given a certain number of representatives based on its population, and today that it's about 700,000 individuals gives you 1 representative on average. There are 435 total representatives, and they serve 2-year terms. So those are the basics. Now, what do you call someone who belongs to the House of Representatives? What do you call someone who belongs to the Senate? Well, the term congressman normally refers to a representative. It is technically correct to call a senator a congressman, but in general, if you're going to be talking about a senator, you just say senator. So congressman is generally understood to mean someone in the House of Representatives. Now here at CCL, you will hear us use the term MOC, and we will use it quite often. And MOC is just an acronym for Member of Congress, MOC. So when we throw that around, that's what that means. Each chamber of Congress has an elected leader. In the House, this person is known as the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and that person currently is Paul Lane. And in the Senate, you have the majority leader, and that at present is Mitch McConnell. Technically, the vice president is the president of the Senate, but it's really the Senate majority leader who determines the business day-to-day of the Senate. Now, Congress divides its legislative oversight and internal administrative tasks among approximately 200 committees and subcommittees. So understanding committees, or at least that they exist and how they function, is pretty important. So we're gonna spend a little bit of time on that right now. Committees are basically where the work gets done. No individual could have expertise on all the things which we ask members of Congress to decide about, and so they realize this and they divide up the task of digging down into these difficult, complicated issues, and they delegate that to these committees. There are 3 types of committees. There are standing committees, select committees, and joint committees. Standing committees are permanent panels. They have legislative jurisdiction, and standing committees consider bills and issues and recommend measures for consideration to their respective chambers, chamber, House, or Senate. Select committees are temporary, and they do things like conduct investigations or conduct studies, and then they're done. They cease to exist. Joint committees are permanent. There are only 4 of them. But they focus on housekeeping tasks, and they're called joint committees because there are both representatives of the House and senators who serve on those committees. And traditionally, what you think of when you think of a congressional committee is a standing committee. It's one of the permanent ones that has legislative jurisdiction. It is also not uncommon for a committee with the same jurisdiction to go by a different name in a different chamber. So, for example, the 2 committees of most interest to CCL, given our policy, are the Ways and Means Committee in the House and the Finance Committee in the Senate. They both have pretty much the same portfolio, but confusingly, they have different names. I don't know the history there, but it's good to be aware of that different names in different houses nonetheless have the same tasks. Standing committees decide which bills and resolutions move forward for consideration by the House or the Senate as a whole, and that's what's meant by a bill being in committee. So let's step back from committees for a minute, and let's look at some of the major differences between the House and the Senate. So in the Senate, you have committees which are easily bypassed, whereas in the House of Representatives, committee chairmen generally have a lot more power. In the Senate, there's more open debate. You have things like filibusters, and it can really slow things down, but that's partly how the Senate was designed. Whereas in the House of Representatives, you have so many people from so many different places that debate is limited. You can't just talk forever. In the Senate, you can have riders, which are introduced. Rider is a piece of legislation which is glommed onto another bill, whereas in the House of Representatives, there are no non-germane amendments. Non-germane meaning not relevant to the main purpose of the bill. In the Senate, there's less hierarchy. You have more generalists. This is again a function of there just being fewer senators. Everybody has to be on more committees and with a wider variety of topics. And in the House of Representatives, there's more hierarchy and specialization. The Senate is foreign policy focused, partly due to the fact that it ratifies treaties, whereas the House of Representatives is more tax and revenue focused. And that is because in the Constitution it states that tax bills have to originate in the House of Representatives. So that all makes sense. In the Senate, you tend to have fewer committees, whereas in the House, you have more committees and subcommittees. All those members of Congress need to have something to do. And in the Senate, floor action can be as influential or even greater influence than committee action. Whereas in the House, committee action is more influential than floor action. So in the House, the committee chairmen have a lot of power. If you have a bill that is referred to a committee and the committee chairman doesn't like that bill, it is his or her, he or she has the power to just let it sit there. and that would be what is called being stuck in committee. So those are some differences between the House and the Senate. So now let's consider what are the resources that each congressional office may have at their disposal. So and how they're set up. So each member of Congress has at least 2 offices, one in the state or district, and a legislative office in Washington, D.C. If a member of Congress represents a large state or district, they may have more than one local office. Each office is different. Each office has their own budget, although for the House that is fixed at $1.4 million per year, and in the Senate that can vary. Each office decides how best to allocate their budget, so they're really operating like small independent businesses. And most of that budget does go to hiring staff. House offices are limited to 18 full-time and 4 part-time staffers, while Senate offices have no limits on staff. And just like a business, each member of Congress hires staff, purchases equipment and furniture, finds office space, and provides services to customers, although in this case the customers are their constituents. So those are some of the logistics of an office and how they work. And the next thing that we're going to consider is who works in these congressional offices. Who is the member of Congress hiring and what do they do? And for this, so you're not just listening to me drone on, I'm going to ask Iona to help me out in a second. And we're just going to go down the list from most important, the most responsibility, on down to lower on the totem pole. So we'll begin with the Chief of Staff. So the Chief of Staff is the head honcho in any congressional office. This person is usually the closest advisor to the legislator and perhaps a longtime personal friend. They run the operation much like a chief operations officer. And Iona?
Okay, I just got unmuted. Here I am. This staffer called, it's the legislative director. This staffer called the LD is the senior policy staffer in the office. This person likely has been with the office for more than 3 or 4 years, has been promoted from legislative assistant and oversees all the major policy decisions. She likely oversees and edits all the newsletters and emails drafted by more junior staffers and has jurisdiction over the issues most important to the legislator or the most prominent issues as determined by the legislator's committee assignments.
And next is the legislative assistant. This staffer, called an LA for short, is the primary office expert on a particular issue. He drafts statements and speeches, writes memos on legislation, and advises the legislator on the issues in her jurisdiction. In the House, LAs can have up to 15 issues to follow. The jurisdiction of Senate LAs ranges from 1 to 10 issues, depending upon the size of the office. House LAs can be younger, under 30, while in the Senate they tend to be older and to have graduate degrees. Legislative staff are both research assistants and policy advisors to members of Congress. They research the facts of an issue, collect the positions of interested parties, analyze the implications to constituents, and synthesize the information for legislators. LAs also interject recommendations on policy decisions on almost every issue in their portfolios, and they research memos. They become policy experts, no matter how limited their experience with the issue, and they do influence legislators. So when approaching a decision, the legislator will always consult his staff, this staff person, on the topic and usually follow the recommendations of the staff. However, this does not mean that the staff control all decision making. They do not. Rather, it means that the staff are usually in tune with the thinking of their bosses and guide them to a decision they assume the legislator desires. The LA is the most likely person who you're going to be meeting with in DC. Iona?
The legislative correspondent. This staffer, called the LC, is primarily responsible for managing and drafting responses to mail. Typically, they're very young, like under 25, and they have less than 2 years of experience on the Hill. They toil at this thankless job, sorting thousands of emails, faxes, postcards, and letters each month, with the hopes that they'll get promoted after one of the LAs finds another job.
Next on down the totem pole is the staff assistant. This staffer primarily handles phone calls to the office and greets visitors. Wise legislators will hire someone from the district or the state for this job in their Washington office so that callers will feel an instant connection. Iona?
The scheduler. This is an important one for us. This staffer may also share the title of office manager and is responsible for the legislator's schedule. Some lawmakers have two schedulers, one in D.C. and another in the state or the district. The scheduler is the ultimate gatekeeper and may be the person who determines whether you and your group meets with a legislator. Try not to be disappointed if you don't get to meet with a member of Congress or a specific policy aide. Not meeting with the pertinent staffer is not necessarily a slight, and these are really busy people. Although it happens again and again, it's a slight, but every once in a while it's not.
And on the topic of busy people, let's dive into that a little bit, because here at CCL it really is important to try and understand who it is you're talking with, regardless of who that is, but especially when it's a congressional staffer. So let's give you a sense for what are these staffers dealing with. Well, first of all, they have long work hours at a fast pace, and as you will see, they're working in pretty cramped conditions. So staffers work 50 to 70 hours per week, and they have to deal with bills which come up. Sometimes if they make a plan for a day, that can be completely changed because something unexpected happened, a vote came up, or unexpectedly. It can be very difficult. And another thing that's really, really difficult to deal with and useful for us to know is that the number of staff that a House member is allotted by law has not changed since the 1970s, 4 decades. This is despite the fact that the workload and expectation to produce has grown exponentially. Each office has received anywhere from a 200% to a 1,000% increase in constituent mail in the past decade alone. And remember, 1970s, that is 4 decades. Another thing to remember is that these staffers are pretty young. The average age of a legislative assistant on Capitol Hill is just 27 years old. So when you're reaching out to them, when you're calling them, when you're talking with them, just keep this in the back of your mind, because it'll help you understand how they're doing. It'll help you connect with them, and they will appreciate the understanding. So having an understanding of how Congress is structured and the workload of the staffers, this will help you build your relationship with your member of Congress. And now I believe Ricky is going to tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. So that's so important, and I think what you were saying, Danny, is key to a relationship. It's appreciating them for just how busy they are, and it's easy to, I guess, get upset if they don't answer their email right away, but they're just like us. They're inundated, so it's good to have that perspective. So thanks so much. So let's switch gears here and talk about what it's like to be a citizens lobbyist, right? And of course, that's our founder, Citizens Climate Education founder, Marshall Saunders, and he always talks about his aha moment. But I really like this quote that he has, and he says, ordinary people like you and me, we have to organize. We have to educate ourselves. We have to give up our hopelessness and our powerlessness and gain the skills to be effective with our government. And I think when you look at it this way, what it really means is, we are truly blessed to live in a country where citizen engagement is not only valued but encouraged. The word lobbying, and maybe here in the U.S. and even in some other cultures that carry some negative connotations with it from time to time. Mostly I think that stems from the practice of paid professional lobbying. However, for us, as citizens, it's not only what I consider our right, but our duty to be engaged and to express our voice. And like we always say, remember, politicians, they don't create the political will, they respond to it. So there's a simple reason why we have stereotypes associated with lobbying and why companies and industry and other people are willing to pay so much for a lobbyist. And it's because it works, right? And what's important to note here, though, is that successful lobbyists, no matter whether they're a paid professional or a passionate, engaged citizen, the most successful lobbyists develop relationships. And fortunately, You don't need millions of dollars to develop a relationship with someone. You really just need to be a human being and be able to relate to people. So let's talk about the role of citizens when it comes to lobbying. As Danny mentioned earlier, especially in the Senate, there are a lot of generalists. And, it's probably that way in the House as well. There are people who know a little bit about a lot of different things. Because we know it's not possible for a member of Congress or their staff to know every detail about every policy. They really do rely on others to inform them. And that's one of the reasons why we meet with them. The other thing to consider is this, is if we are not meeting with them, then who is, right? In the absence of citizens, members of Congress are influenced or informed by lobbyists, industry, and party. Lobbyists in these industry groups, they're meeting with the office frequently, so should we. But really what we're doing and all we're doing is expressing our voices and making the case for what we want Congress to do. So now Iona is going to discuss just how much significance is given to constituents in the lobbying process.
So one of is this slide 24? I think I'm on.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind is that when setting a legislator's daily agenda, constituents always figure prominently. Any constituents who makes an effort to travel to Washington almost always will get a meet a member of Congress or their staff. So a survey of congressional staffers from the Congressional Management Foundation finds that constituents who are able to express an interest, not just an opinion, have more influence. So let's have an example of that. So if a constituent stands up at a town hall meeting and says, I think we should reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, that's an opinion. And the congressman will file it away in one part of his or her brain. But if the same constituent says, I think we should reduce our greenhouse gas emissions because my 3-year-old daughter has respiratory problems, the congressman files it into a completely different compartment. The person has a much stronger bond to the legislator, and the legislator has a much greater obligation to integrate those concerns into the decision-making process. So the takeaway here, obviously, is that constituents with a genuine interest are more likely to have an influence than those who are simply telling them what they want or expressing an opinion. And the last thing I want to review is what you can expect before and during the meeting. So first, when you arrive, outside the office, you'll know that there is going to be a CCL team lead who has experience and more than likely has led several meetings in the past. So every team will have an experienced leader. You should also keep in mind that you need to be flexible. These are busy folks. So you might have a plan or a schedule or an idea of who you're going to be meeting with, but that could change. They may reschedule because things happen. People have to go take votes. They have to go to other meetings. So just stay flexible. Everyone, as you can see in this photo, shows up in business attire. We are putting on a professional image. When you first walk in, you're usually greeted by a staff assistant or an intern, and they're usually like super friendly and nice. Then you should have business cards ready to exchange. This actually, they sort of use them. It helps them verify and determine the number of constituents that have come to a meeting. And then you're going to be seated at a conference table or in chairs in the maybe even in the congressman's office, or maybe chairs in the lobby, or you might even be meeting out in the hallway. And I've had all those kinds of meetings, but don't expect privacy necessarily. So in 2 weeks, our Lobbying 301 webinar, that's going to delve into the actual lobby meeting, and you're going to hear a demonstration of what that can sound like. But right now, let's begin talking about how we can build relationships with Congress. So Danny's going to lead off that discussion by reviewing the differences between paid, professional lobbying, and citizen engagement.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Iona. So really, we want to highlight the differences between what we are and what some other people with opinions are bringing to the table. So we, of course, are the citizen lobbyists. And so how might a member of Congress or their staffer view the differences between a paid lobbyist and a citizen lobbyist like yourself? Well, first of all, a paid lobbyist is a hired gun. It's not clear that they really believe in what they're saying. Somebody else is paying them to believe that, and nobody really identifies with that. Whereas you, as Iona said, you're a constituent. You actually vote for them. In a very real sense, you are their boss. And everybody is going to pay attention to that. And especially when you are paying your way to come to DC, taking your precious time, paying to, for the travel, but then for the hotel, that makes a big impact. And as Iona was bringing up, paid lobbyists, they have an opinion. Citizen lobbyists, they are passionate and they have an interest. They have something on the line. They can express an interest, something at stake, which a paid lobbyist who is based out of DC can't really match. Speaking of DC, paid lobbyists are frequently, if not always, in DC. They have access to the legislator all the time, and by contrast, citizen lobbyists are only occasionally in DC. So that's one difference. This may be an advantage to the paid lobbyists. But the next point is that paid lobbyists are rarely in the district at all, whereas citizen lobbyists are pretty much always in the district. And that can also be an advantage. And one of the things that we did earlier this year was we tried out our first lobby drive, where we really focused in on trying to take advantage of this home court advantage as citizen lobbyists, going and making a dedicated effort to make it to the district offices and make our case there. So there are differences between these two types of lobbyists, and what I really want you to do is not try and be a paid lobbyist, but really wrap your head around what are the advantages of being a citizen lobbyist, and try and become comfortable with those and think about how can you play up those advantages, how can you embody those advantages when you're going to DC and you're meeting with your member of Congress. And the other thing that's really important to keep in mind here is that the most valuable gift a lobbyist gives to a member of Congress isn't a campaign contribution. Rather, it is a detailed analysis of how a particular issue affects the lawmaker's district or state. Some state associations, nonprofits, and corporate leaders may offer this data, but many do not. And we can say with certainty that no one, except CCL, is identifying and researching how carbon fee and dividend affects the legislator's constituents. So this is the most valuable tool of any lobbyist, is knowledge of how a policy decision will impact the state or the district, and being able to bring that information to a member of Congress and make it relevant to them. This is your most valuable gift, and it's like that responsibility that Ricky was talking about. They're just people. They are like you and me. They have limits in what they can wrap their heads around, and it is our responsibility, our duty, to represent our interest to them, to inform them about how they can do their job to account for that interest.
Great. Thanks, Danny. So then moving on then, so how do we go about building these meaningful, long-term relationships with members of Congress and their staff? And obviously, the one and only rule we have at Citizens Climate Lobby is that we treat everyone with genuine respect, appreciation, and gratitude. And a lot of people have heard of Dale Carnegie, and you understand like the way to win friends and influence people is to understand someone else's problems and someone else's interests. So it really it's important for us to understand how to influence people, but also how to connect with them and how to build that relationship. And as a citizen lobbying your member of Congress, keep in mind you'll be much more powerful by starting a conversation on a personal level. Asking about a congressman's kid who just went to college, or maybe where they went to college. Mention that you saw him or her in the paper recently. Usually if they're in the paper, they're pretty proud of something that they've accomplished, and connect with them on that. Be genuinely interested in something that they are proud of. Will get you a long way. A bill they've recently passed. Bring that up. We have that as part of our a lobby meeting outline, is a specific place where you show appreciation. And so that's a great way to start the meeting. But it goes, without saying, though, that, part of the reason that we are there, or that lobbyists are so successful at their job, is because they know the issues. They become trusted advisors or policy experts, and we can do that as well. I mean, we have specific information regarding how our policy is going to impact their state or district, and it's good information. No one else has that. That is a huge advantage for us. Plus, we want to stay in contact with them frequently. Every congressional office knows about those constituents who stay on top of issues and don't hesitate to offer help or advice on how a legislator should or they think they should vote. So keeping in regular contact with your legislator or staff provides a valuable service to them and keeps them accountable to their voters. And there are plenty of stories with CCL volunteers and liaisons who will tell you now that certain members of Congress or staff actually call them for advice or information about carbon pricing and different things. Now, it takes a while to build up that relationship, but it's through this trusted advisor role, getting to know them personally and communicating frequently with them, that this has transpired. And as I mentioned, we're always about respect, appreciation, and gratitude. It's the cornerstone of who we are, and it's how we build relationships. So we talk about respect, and it's the case in DC sometimes that we may not have constituents in a meeting, and part of respect is respecting people's time. And as Danny mentioned earlier, these staffers are extremely busy people. First and foremost, and as Iona mentioned, a congressional office wants to meet with constituents. But unfortunately, though, not everyone can come to DC. And in fact, we limit the number of volunteers that can lobby with us in DC to 800, so that everyone who wants to get a schedule is guaranteed to get one. So you may be in a constituentless meeting, and how do you demonstrate that we respect their time even though there are no constituents in the meeting? And this is the case. If you have information about how our policy will impact their district, remember, that's the most important tool we have at our disposal. So even if you aren't a constituent, you've got some political capital by being in there because you've got information that they want. You're a policy advisor. Additionally, mention that we do have supporters in the district. We have supporters in every district across the U.S., so you can say that and feel confident in that. But in these instances, when you are in a meeting and there are no constituents, it is important to remember that you really have what we call a sacred duty or a sacred trust to complement the relationship, because there are going to be constituents back in the district who are going to have to pick up that relationship and keep going. So you have a trust there to enhance that relationship. But just keep in mind, like I said, if there are no constituents there, go into the meeting thinking about how you represent the constituents. You're representing the people who could not be there. Of course, there's a lot more to building relationship than these few things we've mentioned, but relationships really start on this framework and blossom in many different directions, and we can't cover all those directions. So once you know your office, you've become a trusted advisor, and you're in frequent contact with them, you'll start to understand and see how the relationship differs and how it progresses, and you'll figure out yourself how to deepen that relationship. Okay, so we're at the last section for tonight, and then we're going to open it up for the Q&A. With each lobby training webinar for this year, we are going to include a demonstration of advanced listening and communication skills. So we all know we practice our laser talk so we can internalize facts and messaging, so we're not struggling to remember the important facts about our policy, but we've internalized them. But we also need to continually practice asking questions, identifying values, and showing curiosity and genuine curiosity, right? And finding that common ground in the views that other people have that we're meeting with. It's so important. Now, so we're going to go through a script here in just a moment. Danny and Iona they're your actors for this evening. Now, it's not the content of the script that's really important here in this demonstration, Rather, what's important here is the adaptive process Iona uses, who's going to be our CCL volunteer in this demonstration, to draw out more information from Danny, who's going to play the congressional staffer. So listen carefully to what Iona does to draw out more information, what she does to identify values, and what she does to determine that it's okay to proceed to give Danny information. So once again, Danny's going to play the congressional staffer. Iona's going to play the CCL volunteer. And the situation here that they're going to portray is that Iona, the CCL volunteer, has just finished explaining to the staffer how the dividend works. And Danny will pick it up.
Iona, thank you for explaining this to me, but this looks like a form of income redistribution to me.
That's interesting, Danny. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, obviously, wealthier people are paying more of the carbon fee than poor people, so they come out behind.
I'm wondering, is this an issue of fairness to you?
Yes, yes. I think that everyone should be treated the same.
Well, that matters to me too, that things be fair. That's why I actually like it that everyone gets the same dividend instead of some people getting more and some less. Does that seem fair to you?
Yes, but there are still some winners and losers here.
Well, you're right. There are. Why do you think that is?
Well, I suppose because some people use more fossil fuels than others, so their costs go up more than people who use less.
I think you're right. And we actually have some data that shows exactly how the people in your district would fare under carbon fee and dividend. Would you like to take a look at that now?
Sure, let's have a look.
Bravo, bravo, standing ovation. Very good, guys. So hopefully you picked up there on in that demonstration, not so much the content about what was going on, but really how Iona asked questions to get more information out of Danny. And she did this to determine really what was the underlying value behind his income redistribution comment, right? And then she figured it out. He was really talking about fairness. Then she agreed with that value. She sought some common ground, and she asked a couple of additional questions before then she asked for permission to proceed, which is very important. Now, think about the flip side. Think about how different that conversation feels if immediately following Danny's income redistribution comment, Iona were to launch into the data from the household impact study. It really would have felt as if she was telling Danny he was wrong. Instead, she craftily steered the conversation towards finding common ground and then asked for his permission to let us tell him what we've learned. So at that point, Danny is really prepared for what we have to say. That takes time and skill and practice to learn how to do. So as we're preparing for our meetings with our members of Congress throughout the next 6 weeks, it'd be a really good idea to get with your teams to practice this concept. But it only comes with time and practice. But I think it's the most valuable thing. One of the most valuable things we can do in the meeting is to continually ask questions to draw out more information so we can make sure we have a clear understanding of really what their objective is or their misconception is, as Ellie likes to talk about. Okay, so tonight, just to wrap up some key learnings, and then we'll go over the questions. So the key learnings from tonight: hopefully you understand the differences and the advantages of, and disadvantage, obviously, of being a paid lobbyist versus an engaged citizen. Understand really what the most influential tool of a lobbyist is, whether they be a paid lobbyist or a citizen, and that is that information on how that policy will impact the member's district. Keep in mind that staffers are extremely busy and that sometimes you're not going to get the kind of response that you want right away, but keeping in mind that they may have 10 different policy areas that they're the legislative assistant for. So keeping those things in mind helps us understand the context within which they operate, and maybe can help us be a little more relatable to them as well. Have an interest, not just an opinion. So those folks who can tell you why they're there, not just what they're there for, it's very important. And also connecting on shared values. Dr. Hayhoe was one of our advisory board members, and obviously you know, a well-renowned, world-renowned climate scientist. Always says that we should be bonding and connecting on values, and then people will come around to the science, but that's the first step.